The year is 2450 BC. Two Sumerian city-states are going to war, not over gold, not over conquest, not over religion, over a ditch. A boundary ditch dug between farmland, maybe 20 miles long, marking the border between Lagash and Umma, two cities separated by a strip of fertile land called the Gu-edena, the edge of paradise. This ditch will start a war that lasts 150 years, that kills tens of thousands, that creates the first recorded military monuments, the first written justifications for war, the first propaganda claiming gods demanded violence. And it starts because one city diverts water from the other. This is not a border dispute, this is economic warfare in its purest form. Control the water, control the crops. Control the crops, control the food. Control the food, control everything. This is the story of humanity's first recorded war. How irrigation technology created the conditions for organized violence. How economic competition transformed into total war. And how a pattern that started in 2450 BC is playing out right now in the Middle East over the exact same resource. But before understanding how water started civilization's first war, we need to see why Sumerians were fighting over ditches in the first place. Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. This is where civilization begins, not because the land is naturally fertile, because humans figured out how to make it fertile through irrigation. The rivers flood unpredictably. Too much water destroys crops. Too little water means famine. But if you can control the water through canals and ditches, you can grow surplus food. And surplus food means cities, specialization, armies, civilization. By 3000 BC, Sumer has dozens of city-states, each controlling irrigation networks, each dependent on water flow, each vulnerable if water is cut off. Lagash and Umma are neighboring city-states, separated by the Gu-edena, a strip of fertile land maybe 10 miles wide, fed by canals branching from the main rivers. This land is valuable, incredibly valuable. It can feed thousands. Both cities claim the Gu-edena. Both have been farming portions of it for generations, and both know that whoever controls the water controls the land. Around 2500 BC, tensions escalate. Umma is upstream on some canals, Lagash is downstream. When Umma diverts water for its own fields, Lagash crops fail. When Lagash demands more water, Umma faces shortages. This is not theoretical conflict, this is existential threat. Cities that cannot feed their populations collapse. Irrigation-dependent agriculture creates absolute dependency on water access. And someone has to decide who gets the water when there is not enough for both. But here is what makes this truly revolutionary. This is the first time in human history that resource competition is organized into formal warfare. The rulers of Lagash and Umma negotiate a boundary. They agree to divide the Gu-edena, draw a border, dig a boundary ditch marking each city's territory, establish neutral zone, swear oaths before their gods that the border is sacred and permanent. This should end the conflict. The border is clear, the water rights are divided, both cities agree. But here is the problem with irrigation-based economies. Population grows, more people need more food needs more water, and the water supply is fixed. Within a generation, both cities are exceeding their agreed boundaries. Farmers from Umma cross the boundary ditch, plant crops in Lagash territory, claim the land was always Umma's. Lagash farmers do the same in reverse. The rulers protest, threaten, send armed men to enforce the boundary. Skirmishes break out, farmers are killed, fields are burned. And then Umma makes a strategic decision that will start civilization's first recorded war. They fill in the boundary ditch, erase the border, and claim the entire Gu-edena belongs to Umma, always has. The gods decreed it. Lagash is occupying sacred Umma territory. This is not just territorial expansion. This is economic warfare. By erasing the boundary, Umma is claiming control of water rights that feed both cities. Lagash must either accept losing half its farmland or fight. Lagash chooses war, and the justification they use will echo through every war in human history. The ruler of Lagash is Enatum, and he does something no ruler before him has done. He creates a monument justifying the war, explaining why violence is necessary, why gods demand it, why the enemy deserves destruction. This is the Stele of the Vultures, a stone pillar carved with images and text, the first war propaganda in human history, and the arguments it makes are still used today. The Stele shows Gu-edena leading his army, soldiers marching in formation with spears and shields. This is organized warfare, not tribal raiding, not spontaneous violence, coordinated military action with command structure and tactical discipline. But more importantly, the Stele explains that the war is not about resources, it is about divine justice. The god Ningirsu, patron of Lagash, has commanded Gu-edena to punish Umma for violating the sacred boundary. The gods drew the original border, Umma erased it, therefore Umma has committed sacrilege. This is brilliant propaganda. The war is not about water rights and crop yields, it is about religious duty. Soldiers are not fighting for economic advantage, they are fighting for their god. Dying in this war is not waste, it is sacrifice. And this justification transforms a resource conflict into holy war. Gu-edena marches his army to the Gu-edena, meets Umma's forces, and defeats them in pitched battle. The Stele shows piles of enemy dead, vultures feeding on corpses, hence the name. Umma's ruler is killed, the city surrenders. Gu-edena restores the boundary ditch, forces Umma to swear new oaths, imposes tribute, takes hostages, and declares divine victory. The war should be over, the boundary is re-established, the gods have spoken through battle, Lagash won, Umma lost. But the war has actually just begun, because Gu-edena made a critical error. He did not solve the resource problem, he just forced Umma to accept less water than they need to survive. 20 years later, Umma rebels. A new ruler, new army, same argument, the boundary is unjust. The gods actually favor Umma. Lagash is the aggressor, the water rights must be renegotiated. This time, Umma wins, defeats Lagash forces, pushes the boundary deeper into Lagash territory, claims more of the Gu-edena, erects their own victory monument claiming divine mandate. And this pattern repeats for 150 years. Lagash wins a battle, pushes the boundary, claims divine favor. Umma rebuilds, counterattacks, wins, moves the boundary back, claims the gods now support them. Each generation fights. Each generation justifies violence through religion. Each generation believes this war will finally settle the question. And each generation discovers that resource conflicts cannot be solved through conquest when the resource itself is limited. Because here is the fundamental problem that neither city understands. The water supply from the Tigris and Euphrates is finite. The population of both cities is growing. Agricultural technology cannot increase yields significantly. Therefore, both cities are competing for a resource that cannot support both populations. Whoever wins the war, someone starves. Moving the boundary just changes who starves. It does not solve the core economic problem. But neither city will admit this, because admitting it means admitting that war is futile, that violence is not solving anything, that the only solutions are population control or migration. So they keep fighting, generation after generation, each side claiming righteousness, each side convinced that one more victory will bring permanent peace, each side wrong. And the war only ends when a third power conquers both cities and imposes peace through overwhelming force. But the pattern that starts at Lagash and Umma never ends, it just scales up. The Lagash-Umma war is the first time humans organize resource competition into formal warfare. Before irrigation agriculture, humans were nomadic or lived in small settlements. Conflict was tribal raiding, taking resources through opportunistic violence. There was no sustained warfare because there was no fixed infrastructure to fight over. But irrigation creates fixed infrastructure, canals that take years to dig, fields that take generations to develop, cities that cannot move, and water systems that absolutely must be controlled. Suddenly, violence has strategic objectives: destroy enemy canals, cut off water supply, force enemy city to surrender through economic starvation. This is not raiding, this is siege warfare, economic warfare, total war. And the Lagash conflict creates templates that will be used for 5,000 years. Religious justification for resource wars. Claiming gods demand violence makes soldiers willing to die, makes populations willing to suffer, makes peace negotiations impossible because compromise means defying divine will. Economic warfare through infrastructure destruction. Umma repeatedly destroys Lagash irrigation ditches. Lagash diverts water upstream from Umma. Both sides understand that controlling water means controlling everything. Infrastructure becomes the primary military target. Propaganda monuments declaring victory and divine favor. Every ruler who wins a battle erects a stele. Every stele claims the gods chose them. Every stele rewrites history to make their cause righteous. This is information warfare, controlling the narrative about why the war is necessary. Cyclical warfare driven by unsolved resource problems. The war never truly ends because the underlying scarcity never resolves. Each peace treaty is temporary. Each generation fights again because population growth keeps exceeding resource availability. And this pattern does not stay in Sumer. It spreads across every civilization that depends on irrigation agriculture. Ancient Egypt, the Nile River determines everything. Pharaohs fight wars to control upstream water sources, build canals to divert water to favored regions, use water access as political weapon. Cities that rebel lose irrigation rights, drought becomes punishment. This is economic warfare on national scale. Same principle as Lagash and Umma, different geography, identical strategy. Ancient China, the Yellow River and Yangtze River civilizations, dynasties rise and fall based on water control. The state that manages irrigation effectively feeds larger armies, conquers neighbors. The state that loses water infrastructure collapses. One of the most devastating military tactics in ancient Chinese warfare is destroying enemy dams, flooding entire regions, destroying years of agricultural investment, forcing mass starvation. Same pattern as the Gu-edena, larger scale. Indus Valley, Mesopotamian civilizations after Sumer, Andean civilizations. Every society built on irrigation agriculture fights wars over water control. The technology is identical. The conflicts are identical. The justifications are identical. Water wars are not unique events. They are the inevitable result of irrigation-dependent agriculture in arid regions. The Lagash conflict is simply the first time humans documented the pattern. But the pattern accelerates over time because technology improves, and improved technology makes resource conflicts more deadly. The invention of bronze weapons around 3000 BC transforms warfare. Copper and bronze tools allow larger canal systems, more efficient irrigation, greater crop yields, larger populations, bigger armies. But bronze weapons also make warfare more lethal. Bronze spears penetrate shields, bronze axes break through armor, casualties increase, wars become more brutal. The Lagash conflict happens at the intersection of these technologies. Advanced irrigation creating large populations, bronze weapons making organized warfare effective, and writing systems allowing rulers to justify violence through propaganda. This combination creates the first recognizable ancient warfare: armies of thousands, organized formations, siege tactics, economic warfare, propaganda, total war. And it all starts over water rights. The stele of the Vultures shows soldiers in tight formation, shields overlapping, spears projecting forward. This is phalanx tactics. The same tactics that Greek hoplites will use 2,000 years later, the same tactics that Roman legions will perfect. Military technology does not start with great empires. It starts with Sumerian city-states fighting over irrigation ditches. The innovations are driven by resource competition. The tactics are proven in water wars, then spread to larger conflicts. By the time empires rise, warfare is already sophisticated, professionalized, justified through religious ideology, and always fundamentally about resource control. The Lagash War is not a primitive conflict that civilization outgrows. It is the template that civilization is built on. And 5,000 years later, the same pattern is playing out over the same resource in the same region. Modern Middle East, water wars are still being fought. Israel and Palestine fight over aquifers. Whoever controls groundwater controls agriculture, controls population, controls the future. The same conflict as Lagash and Umma, same resource, same geography, same stakes. Turkey builds dams on the Tigris and Euphrates, controls water flow to Syria and Iraq, uses water access as political leverage, threatens to cut off supply if downstream nations oppose Turkish policy. This is economic warfare using infrastructure control, exactly what Umma did to Lagash. Egypt and Ethiopia fight over the Nile. Ethiopia builds the Grand Renaissance Dam. Egypt claims this violates water rights. Threatens war if water flow decreases. Both nations claim historical rights. Both invoke national survival, neither willing to compromise because water determines everything. Yemen's civil war is partly driven by water scarcity. Aquifers depleting, agriculture collapsing, cities running out of drinking water, population competing for diminishing resource. Violence becomes inevitable when resources cannot support population. The technology changed. We have diesel pumps instead of hand-dug canals, concrete dams instead of earth ditches, satellite reconnaissance instead of scouts, but the fundamental conflict is identical. Limited water, growing populations, agriculture dependent on irrigation, infrastructure that can be destroyed or controlled, and violence as the tool for determining who gets access. The Lagash-Umma conflict happened 4,500 years ago, but it never ended, it just scaled. From city-states fighting over 10 miles of farmland to nations fighting over entire river systems, from thousands dying to millions at risk, from bronze weapons to precision airstrikes targeting water infrastructure. The pattern persists because the underlying problem persists. Arid regions, irrigation agriculture, population growth exceeding water supply, and human inability to solve resource competition through cooperation. But there is an additional dimension that makes this particularly dangerous. Climate change is making water wars inevitable on global scale. Glaciers that feed major rivers are melting, rainfall patterns are shifting, droughts are lasting longer, and populations continue growing in regions already facing water scarcity. The Middle East is becoming more arid, temperatures rising faster than global average, ancient aquifers depleting faster than recharge rates, rivers carrying less water, growing seasons shortening. Within 50 years, multiple Middle Eastern nations may face absolute water scarcity. Not shortage, scarcity, not enough water to maintain current populations even with perfect conservation. This is the Gu-edena problem at continental scale. Multiple nations competing for water that cannot support all of them, and modern military technology makes the potential conflicts catastrophically destructive. Dams are obvious military targets. Precision weapons can destroy them from hundreds of miles away, releasing floods that kill millions downstream. This is not theoretical. This is documented military planning. Cyber warfare can target water infrastructure, shut down pumping stations, disable treatment plants. Cities of millions lose water supply within days, collapse follows. And unlike Lagash and Umma, which fought with bronze weapons over a strip of farmland, modern nations have nuclear weapons and fight over entire river systems feeding hundreds of millions. The scale changed, the technology changed, the stakes changed, but the fundamental dynamic remains identical to 2450 BC. Limited resource, growing populations, infrastructure dependency, economic competition transforming into violence, religious or nationalistic justification making compromise impossible. Lagash and Umma fought for 150 years before external conquest imposed peace. Modern Middle Eastern water conflicts have no external power strong enough to impose solutions, and the resource is depleting faster than population is stabilizing. The world's first war started over a ditch. The next major war might start over a dam. Same pattern, different technology, same inevitable outcome when resource competition meets military capability. The lesson from Lagash and Umma is not that humans are naturally violent. The lesson is that resource scarcity plus infrastructure dependency creates conditions where violence becomes rational, where cooperation fails because someone has to lose, where war offers at least the chance of survival while peace means certain starvation for someone. Lagash and Umma did not fight because they hated each other. They fought because irrigation agriculture created absolute dependency on water control, and the water supply could not support both cities at the population levels they reached. Every diplomatic solution was temporary. Every boundary agreement lasted until population growth forced renegotiation. Every peace treaty was just an intermission in the ongoing war. And neither city could solve the problem through technology. The agricultural techniques were maxed out. The irrigation systems were optimal for the geography. The water supply was fixed by natural river flow. No innovation could create more water. So they fought, generation after generation, using religious justification to make the war seem noble, using propaganda to make each new generation willing to fight, using military force to temporarily resolve what economics made unsolvable. And when Sargon of Akkad conquered both cities around 2300 BC, he did not solve the water problem either. He just absorbed both populations into a larger empire where the resource competition continued at larger scale. The pattern that starts at the Gu-edena never ends, it just transforms. City-state conflicts become empire wars become national conflicts threaten to become civilizational collapse. Because the fundamental dynamic persists, human populations grow, resources remain fixed or deplete, agriculture creates infrastructure dependency, and violence becomes the tool for allocating scarce resources when cooperation fails. The world's first war started over a ditch. It lasted 150 years, and it never truly ended. It just scaled up over 5,000 years until now billions of people face the same conflict over the same resource in the same region. Lagash and Umma teach us that resource wars do not end with military victory. They end when populations stabilize below resource carrying capacity or when technology increases supply. Neither is happening in water-scarce regions. Which means the pattern will continue. The first war teaches us what the next war will look like, and history suggests we will ignore the lesson until violence becomes inevitable. The Gu-edena was the edge of paradise. Two cities fought over it for 150 years until they destroyed what made it valuable. The Middle East is doing the same thing on continental scale, fighting over water that war itself will make unusable. The ditch that started the first war should have taught humanity to solve resource conflicts before fighting begins. Instead, it taught us to justify resource wars with religion and propaganda while ignoring the underlying problem. 5,000 years later, we are still following that script, still claiming gods or nations demand control of water, still using violence to resolve what economics and technology should solve, still believing one more victory will bring permanent peace. Lagash and Umma proved that belief wrong. History keeps proving it wrong. But every generation believes they will be the exception. Until the water runs out for everyone.